Your job title is not your identity. You already know that. So tell me why losing the job feels so much like losing yourself. That's the part that nobody explains. And it's the reason why a new job or a vacation never really fixes it. Now, before I explain what's happening, I want you to hear this. Whatever burnout took from you, you can rebuild it. And by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly how to do that. When we talk about burnout, everyone talks about the exhaustion and the cynicism. But there's a third dimension and nobody really talks about it, but it's the one that's keeping you stuck right now. So here's where we're going. First, we're going to talk about what that third dimension actually is. Then we're going to get into the 4 ways that it tears you apart. And we're going to wrap up with a 4-phase method to get yourself back. Christina Maslach, who is the pioneer researcher on burnout, named this third dimension as loss of efficacy. So in normal people terms, this basically means that you've lost your sense of what you're actually good at, why you're good at it, and who you are in the context of your work. This is the dimension that takes apart pieces of you and doesn't give them back. But the person that you're trying to get back isn't gone. Burnout just buried them a little deeper. So before we do any digging, let's actually talk about what this means. So there's a term that I want to introduce to you. A journalist, Derek Thompson, coined the term workism in a 2019 Atlantic article. The term describes the belief that work isn't just economically necessary, but it's central to your personal fulfillment, your meaning, and your sense of identity and purpose. So essentially, work isn't something that you do, it's who you are, and it's where your worth lives. And the thing about workism is that it doesn't necessarily feel like a trap when you walk into it because it feels like ambition. Because when you care about the work and you're good at it and you get a lot of recognition and you feel a lot of forward motion from it, it makes sense that it becomes central to your identity. It's a completely logical response to an environment that basically ties your worth to the work and your output. The problem is when the job stops holding up its end of the bargain. So when the culture shifts or the manager becomes intolerable or the work expands beyond what any one person can do, the work that you used to love then becomes something that you're just surviving. So at that point, the identity that you've built around this thing called work becomes a very vulnerable liability. Your sense of worth, competence, and direction has been tied to something that is making you actively miserable. And you can't get clear distance from it because you've fused yourself to it. That's identity erosion. It's this slow process where the parts of you that exist outside of work, like your curiosity, your opinions, your interests, your hobbies, your relationships, they all start to fade into the background. Work doesn't stay at work anymore. It follows you home and it enters your dinner chats and your conversations with your friends and even your sleep. There's no actual off switch because there's no actual edge to the job. It essentially permeates everything. And even when the inbox isn't calling your name, there's still something inside of you that's reaching back for work. There's a few researchers, Curran and Hill, that tracked this for something like 27 years. Since 1989, the kind of perfectionism that we soak up from everything around us has gone up by 33%. And that's the version most strongly linked to burnout in the research. It's the perfectionism that demands that you keep proving you're enough. So that's what makes identity erosion unique in a way. The environment creates the conditions and your convictions make sure you stay. So if that was the what, this is the how. 4 specific mechanisms drive identity erosion. Now you probably won't recognize all 4 in yourself, but I will be surprised if you don't recognize at least 1 or 2. So the first is role expansion. So when your job grows, your identity grows with it. So you started out as a project manager, but then you find yourself filling the role of team therapist, gap filler, and even the fixer. So the role stops having edges. And when that happens, you ultimately stop having edges as well. Now, the second one is the validation feedback loop. High performers get recognized and promoted. So that recognition that's tied to output teaches your nervous system that your value is tied to your production. So when your production or your performance drops, it doesn't just feel like a professional problem, it becomes a very personal issue. It's essentially evidence that something is wrong with you. This is that loss of efficacy piece from Maslach's research. Your confidence becomes attached to your output. So the minute your output drops, your confidence comes with it. Now, the third is cognitive narrowing. A nervous system that's under sustained stress does not have the capacity for big picture thinking or curiosity. So things that used to interest you or questions that you wanted to explore or hobbies that you were interested in all get crowded out because your system is focused on just pure survival. And when that goes on long enough, you stop actually missing those things. You just don't have them anymore. Now, the fourth one is the one that I think is most underestimated. It's the coping strategy that was supposed to protect you. So I have clients who at some point in a wrong fit job made a conscious decision. This isn't who I am. This is just what I do for money. Makes sense. It's a reasonable move to create some distance. You park the real version of yourself somewhere safe, and then you take a different version of yourself to work every day. And as a coping mechanism, that certainly works for a while. I sat across from a client a few months ago who basically described this situation. She'd had a career she loved, but when she took a different position for financial reasons, she started separating herself from the role. And she actually called it parking herself. 10 years later, when I was talking with her, she told me that she had nothing that she was proud of from that last decade. That absence of pride actually became its own crisis. Essentially, that parking lot was empty. She'd forgotten where she put herself. Now, before I get into the rebuild, I want to ask you something. If you recognize any of these four mechanisms, I want you to drop which one below in the comments. Is it role expansion, or the validation loop, or cognitive narrowing, or the parking lot? I'm really curious which one hit hardest for you, and it'll also help me know where to go deeper in another video. All right, now we've talked about this before. Most burnout advice targets exhaustion. Rest more, change your environment, get a good morning routine, yada, yada, yada. And those things aren't wrong necessarily. It's just they're targeted at a specific driver. But if identity erosion is your primary driver, then those behavioral changes aren't going to help because the problem is structural. You can take a vacation and still feel just as lost because all the vacation does is press pause. And this is also why job changes don't always work the way people hope they would. You have to do the reconstruction work. Identity erosion requires a specific kind of repair. Actual diagnostic work that tells you what broke, what's still intact, and what you need to build from. So that's the 4-phase method I want to walk you through. I call this evidence-based because you are working from what's already there. You're recovering what burnout covered up. So phase 1 is grief. This is the step that you're most likely to skip. Burnout took something from you. A lot of times it took some things, plural. Maybe it's a version of you that had interests, that had direction, that felt competent. That's a real loss. If you move straight to strategy without naming the loss, the strategy won't stick. You will be carrying the weight that you haven't acknowledged yet. And the grief phase doesn't have to be elaborate. It just needs to be honest. What did you give this job that it didn't give back? What version of yourself did you set aside and never return to? What did you used to want that you stopped letting yourself want? Write it down, say it out loud, and don't talk yourself out of it. Just state the loss. Phase 2 is diagnosis. So once you've named the loss, we can now dig into what caused it. This is where the 5 C's framework becomes the tool. Was it conditions where the role stopped having edges? Was it culture where you were in a place that rewarded overwork and punished any kind of separation? Or maybe it was your convictions that were co-signing all of this because of your perfectionism or your people pleasing or whatever. Or was it choices because there was this slow decay of autonomy? Or was it truly capacity where you literally had nothing left in the tank for anything outside of work? The diagnosis matters because it changes what you do next. Convictions-driven identity erosion requires a different intervention than conditions-driven erosion. You skip the diagnosis and you treat the wrong thing. Phase 3 is mapping. This is where you find what's still there because your strengths didn't disappear. Burnout makes you think they did because it hides them really well, but that's more of a visibility problem, not an actual existence problem. So I want you to think about the last time that work felt good. Not perfect, but good. What were you doing? What kind of problems were you solving? What did it require of you? And separately, who are you and what do you enjoy doing when no one's evaluating you? What would you do with a free Saturday if productivity was not a factor? I'm not asking these as self-help questions. I'm asking these as diagnostic ones. That gap between who you are at work and who you are away from it tells you how much erosion has actually happened. That data is your roadmap. Now we move on to phase 4, the reconstruction phase. People usually want to start here first. And that is exactly why I put it last. Because reconstruction without the first 3 phases is basically like throwing spaghetti at the wall. Because you'd be building an entirely new identity on top of an ungrieved loss, an undiagnosed driver, and strengths you never uncovered. It won't hold. So what reconstruction looks like is you take phase 2 and phase 3 and combine them into statements about who you are that have nothing to do with your job title. What are you good at? What do you value? What problems do you want to be solving? What context brings out the best of you? This is the work that makes the cost of identity erosion reversible, because the cost actually goes past feeling lost right now. Every career-related decision that you make from an identity-eroded state is compromised. You'll evaluate your options from the lens of someone who can't remember what they want or what they're good at, which probably means you're either going to choose the safest thing or the most familiar thing because you don't have enough information right now to choose differently. The reconstruction work gives you that information back, and that information can lead to a clearer decision. Now, if you recognize yourself in any of this, the most useful step is a conversation, not another video. I work with clients in a 2-hour career reboot strategy session to do the diagnostic work using the 5 C's. We also do the strengths mapping exercise, and you leave with a plan for the reconstruction. If you're at the point where you know something needs to change, but you don't have enough clarity to know what, that's exactly what that session is for. So I'll be sure to add the link in the description below. Or if you want to start with the diagnostic first and kind of see where it takes you, I also have a free Burnout Drivers mini assessment that will give you that information. I'll also link it below. And friend, if you made it this far, go ahead and subscribe, like, comment, all the good things, and go make good choices.